So, with the creation of virtualization, it got companies thinking. Companies like Amazon and Google and Intel and IBM and eventually even Microsoft that, hey, we've got these massive data centers. Why not allow people to pay us to host their virtual machines on our data center? So, in other words, we can get people to pay us money to host their virtual machines, and they don't have to deal with all the headaches of dealing with everything on premise. So, this is really the idea of where cloud services came from. And so, I'm going to draw this kind of big cloud here. This is going to represent cloud computing, if you will. And we'll have a connection coming down here. Okay. And I will just kind of clean that up a little bit, make it somewhat look nice. So this being, the big thing is this is not a new concept of, if you think about humans as a whole, we have offered services for years. I know how to change the oil in my car, but I don't necessarily enjoy doing it. So I can pay a mechanic shop the fee, and they will do it for me as a service, right? Well, this is the idea of cloud services. So there's some acronyms I want to introduce you to. The first one being the term IaaS, and that is infrastructure as a service. So infrastructure as a service means the cloud provider is offering their infrastructure for a fee as a service, okay? So the idea being something like this: instead of me having to host my virtual machines and all that in my on-premise environment, I can pay this cloud company to host virtual machines for me. They can also host a virtual network for you. They can host, they can have storage that's offered to you. They can have firewalls, virtual firewalls that are associated on those virtual networks, and virtual load balancers. Okay, they can have apps out there that are available. They can have virtual databases that are hosted in the cloud. So essentially, just about anything you could imagine that you can host on premise can be hosted out there in the cloud service. Now, Amazon, Google, IBM, Intel, Microsoft, these various companies offer this Microsoft's cloud service that does this. Their IaaS service is called Azure. Now, let me just kind of clarify. You may pronounce that name, that word, a little different than I do, Azure or Azure or Azure. Actually, years ago when I was first learning Azure, I actually went to the internet and started watching videos of the developers that created Azure, and the first few developers that I watched, that's how they pronounced it. They pronounced it Azure. So that's how I just assumed that it needed to be pronounced. Of course, I learned later down the road that not all the developers even agree on how to pronounce that word. Some of them pronounced it Azure, Azure. I've even heard somebody pronounce it Azure. So this is one of those tomato, pronounce that word any way you want to pronounce it. That's how I say it, which is Azure, okay? So Azure is Microsoft's official infrastructure as a service. And the way that it all works is you pay a fee for what you use every month. Basically, how much CPU, memory, storage, network, all of that you use, that's what you're going to pay for. Okay. Now, there are some other terms, other acronyms that I want to introduce you to. There is an acronym called PaaS, which stands for Platform as a Service, and an acronym called SaaS, which is Software as a Service. Now, the idea there being that there are, well, we'll start with Software as a Service first. Software as a service, the idea is that there is a fully functional app or application that is 100% ready for you to start using, or your users to start using. All you got to do is just jump right in and start using it. Okay, so there are some Azure services that are software as a service. There's also what are called platforms as a service. Now, platform as a service is kind of there's a little bit more work involved from an admin standpoint. So a platform as a service means there is some type of software platform that is available for you to start using, and it's 100% ready for you to use, but you have to go and administer it and use it before it's going to really do anything. A good example of this is Microsoft's directory services in the cloud is called Intra ID. Intra ID. All right, which I want to make, it's very important that you realize that this was formerly called Azure AD, and there's still a lot of documentation out there that refers to this as Azure AD. So it's very important that that you are aware of that. Now, you are taking my course right now, and you should realize that I have hundreds of hours of videos that still that I've got to update that involve that term Azure AD. There are literally hundreds of hours that I have recorded using the term Azure AD, and I'm in the process of updating videos, but be aware that I don't have them all upgraded. So you may hear me refer in the course to stuff as Azure AD. I actually have a video on this for you to watch after these foundation videos. It's a video that says do not skip. So please do not skip that video. Make sure you watch that video because it's going to talk about this name change. So anyway, the name is now Intra ID. It's just a name change. They've changed it to Azure AD. The services are pretty much all the same. It's just a name change. Okay, so Intra ID is a platform as a service. Now, it is Microsoft's directory services. This is where your user accounts and passwords and groups and permissions, role permissions, and all that are all managed through Intra ID, formerly Azure AD. Okay, whereas on-premise in a domain, we called it ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. All right, and I think that's part of the reason Microsoft changed the name, to kind of distinguish the difference between the on-premise Active Directory and the former Active Directory, Azure AD, to Intra ID. Anyway, this platform as a service is ready for you to use, but there's only like one user, and that's the admin, and then you're responsible for going in there as an admin and adding users and controlling things. That's why it's a platform as a service. It's not 100% ready, set up. You have to administer it. Now, Microsoft's main platform as a service functions and software as a service, they have something called Microsoft 365. So there's really two parts to the Microsoft Cloud Service. There's Azure, which is mostly focused on the IaaS side of things. And don't get me wrong, in Azure there are also some platform as a services and software as a services, but it's mostly geared towards IaaS. Whereas Microsoft 365 is mostly geared towards platform as a service. Now, these two are very related. Microsoft 365 sits on top of Azure. You can't have Microsoft 365 without Azure. And if you create an Azure account, then it'll allow you to automatically create a Microsoft 365 account. So these are all related. You're not just going to create an Azure account or not just going to create a Microsoft 365 account. They're pretty much linked together. Okay. Now, in the Microsoft 365 services, you have lots of platform as a services and software as a service. For example, we have what are called the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, which that was formerly called Office 365, and that's the downloadable version of the Microsoft 365 apps, formerly the Office 365 apps like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of that. And there is also something called Office for the web. Now that is fully a software as a service. The Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, that is actually a mix. It's a platform as a service and a software as a service. Most people refer to it as a software as a service because they're downloadable apps. But as an admin, from an admin standpoint, we have to administer that. So the administration side of it is platform as a service. Office for the web is 100% software as a service. These are web-based versions of the Office apps that are ready for your users to use. Once they get a license, they can use it. Okay. Then we have Exchange Online. Okay. So the administration side of that is a platform as a service, but the user side of that is a software as a service, right? And then we've got SharePoint Online, which is the same idea. It's a, admin side is a platform as a service, but the user side, which is what most everybody focuses on, is a software as a service. We have Microsoft Teams, same thing for that. Okay. For messaging and all of that fun stuff. We have a product called Intune, which is an incredibly powerful product. Mobile device management, mobile application management. Intune is what is sort of taking the place of GPOs in the cloud. So On premise, we could control the settings and parameters and attributes, and we could deploy software and all that using GPOs on premise. Well, now when it comes to the cloud service, we can use Intune. We can actually control on-premise machines from Intune. So it is very, very powerful, an incredibly powerful product. Then we've got OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business is a cloud-based storage that users can have access to. So anyway, there's actually so many products that are cloud-based products. There's no way I could put them all in here, but here's some of the main things. Now, as far as the licensing and all of that, with Azure, you are paying for what you use, CPU, RAM, storage, and network. But for the Microsoft 365 services, you have what are called subscriptions, and you purchase a subscription with a certain amount of licenses. So, for example, if I purchase a Microsoft 365 subscription, I can purchase a certain amount of licenses, and I can issue those out to my users, and I will pay a monthly fee for however many licenses that I've got with my subscription. Okay, and that's just giving you a basic understanding of how that works exactly. Okay, so ultimately, though, if I could kind of color code this, we'll say that, the Azure side of this, IaaS, and again, Azure does have some platform as a service stuff as well as software as a service, but it's mostly geared to be a infrastructure as a service. And then the Microsoft 365 is mostly platform as a service, software as a service. So if I was to kind of draw a, kind of just draw around these, we would say that these right here are all geared towards Microsoft 365, and then these are geared towards the infrastructure service, which is Azure. And both of these, Azure and Microsoft 365, they share intra ID. They share intra ID, okay? Yellow or red and blue make purple, right? Okay, so they actually, you create users in the Azure side or the Microsoft 365 side, you're going to see the same users because they are linked together. They share the same directory service, so it's important to understand that. Now, the other piece of this is, what about situations where you want to link all this together? So it's not uncommon nowadays for companies, to have this triangle, to have this on-premise domain, and then also start utilizing Microsoft's cloud services. And then, for years and years, they've always pushed this thing called SSO. SSO is single sign-on, where you have a user has a user account, and that user account gives them access to everything they need. Well, we don't get SSO if you have to have a user account to access things in your domain, and then a different user to access things in the cloud, right? Well, Microsoft has ways around that. They actually have services that you can use for linking these together. And that service, let me just kind of move some of this around a little bit so I can make a little bit more room. We'll put the DNS server there. We'll move this little RAS server down over here. And the server is called Microsoft Intra Connect, and it was formerly Azure AD Connect. Okay, so again, it's called Intra Connect now, and it used to be called Azure AD Connect. And I like to refer to it with the old name as well, just because, be advised, you really kind of need to know the old name as well, because there's still a lot of documentation that will refer to this as the older name. The newer name is Intra Connect. The older name is Azure AD Connect. But this was a server you could set up on premise, and what it would do is it'll synchronize your user accounts out to the cloud. So your on-premise user accounts would get synchronized. So whatever users you have on-premise, and you don't have to synchronize them all, you could pick and choose which ones you synchronize, but your user accounts are going to sync out to Intra ID. And now what will happen is you have this thing called seamless SSO, where when your users log on to the domain, it logs them on in both places. They log on to the on-premise domain as well as in the cloud, which is really, really cool. Now, that is a heavier weight version. There is actually a lighter weight version that's a very, very lightweight application. You don't actually have to dedicate a server to it like they kind of want you to with Connect. There is actually another lighter weight tool called IntraSync or Intra-ID Sync, which is a lighter weight. Now, there's some pluses and minuses to go in either route, which I'm not going to get into right now. But the traditional way to do this was to use this here, IntraConnect, formerly Azure AD Connect. Now, the other thing I'll tell you is this does not sync back. So it would sync users out, but it won't sync users that are created out in the cloud back to on-premise. You cannot currently do that. You can't synchronize users that are created in Intra-ID down here. But any users can be synced out, and it'll even make it where if they change their password, like out in the cloud, it'll sync that as well. So anyway, that kind of gives you a rundown of that. Now, I'll also tell you that Microsoft is moving away from domains. In fact, if you got an on-premise domain like what you see here, then yeah, it's a great idea to utilize this. But if you're a new company, and this really pains me to say it because I have fed my family for over 2 decades by not only teaching about Active Directory on-premise, but also implementing Active Directory on-premise as a consultant. And so it kind of pains me to say this, but as a consultant now, I'm not even recommending that newer companies implement a domain anymore. A lot of companies are now moving to the cloud, and there's ups and downs of that. But to be honest with you, in most cases, your company gets out cheaper by utilizing cloud services. Okay. And so nowadays you can actually set up on-premise machines and manage them through Intune and things like that are in the cloud. You can even have client machines hosted in the cloud, but I'm not going to dive into that right now. Ultimately, though, if you are a company that's been around for a while, then the traditional approach that you see here, where you've got a domain and then you're starting to move into the cloud, you can set up IntraConnect, formerly Azure AD Connect, or Intra-ID Sync, which is the lighter weight version, and you can have things synchronized out to the cloud. All right, well, hopefully these foundation videos have been instructional to you. I hope you got a lot out of this, and you're ready to move on.